Welcome to the Book of Urm, Chapter 19, Epilogue. Epilogue. Piecora and Venexi stepped through the liquid portal and found themselves in a dark, wet, muddy cave lit by an eerie green ambient light. They both carried packs of gear and bags containing various gifts from the Scythians. Looking down and to their left, they saw small clumps of iridescent green gems extruded through soft mire and immersed in dark, still pools. The gem fields spread further into the darkness of the tunnel until disappearing around a bend in the far distance. Venexi snorted with satisfaction and said, "Just our luck!" He turned toward the gems, but Piecora grabbed his arm. Venexi whirled his head back to face her, locking her eyes with his unsettling, reflective goat eyes. His mouth curled in a snarl, revealing sharp, Unscavian teeth, and his tail whipped back and forth. In the soft green glow, Piecora's face was an unmoving countenance of disappointment. "Have you forgotten already?" she asked sternly. "Bogea must have a sense of humor to drop us in this cave. This is exactly where it all started. If you touch one gem, I'm leaving you here to whatever fate the Gwagwbanog have for you." She shoved his arm back into his custody and stormed away without looking back. It was a long trek through the winding tunnel within the forbidden mountains of the wildlands, but she heard no discordant song from the Gwagwbanog. As she finally emerged from the cave entrance and walked to the edge of the promenade in the mountainside, she was met with a strong, cool breeze and a wide vista of the wildlands around her. Hero zipped out from the cave entrance behind her and soared high overhead, his shadow racing across the mountainside. She watched him fly acrobatically in the blue sky, with the same jubilation that she now felt to be back home where she belonged. She wore a brand new, pure white, light and comfortable, loose-neck Scythian cotton shirt that billowed from beneath a dark Scythian leather midsection girdle and around her arms beneath bare shoulders. The girdle was studded with hexagonal lamellar plates and conformed to the curvature of her waist. The circular motif of the mother tree, burnished into the dark leather and dyed in yellow, featured prominently in the center of the girdle. Strips of leather, dyed in teal and blue with silver rings woven into them, hung down from the girdle around her upper thighs. Fine teal and gold Scythian lettering was woven into the seams of the shirt that spelled the story of Shadialom and his sacrifice to save Cynthia. Hanging down from her neck on her exposed, dark-tanned skin was the platinum Scythian coin on a silver chain that gleamed in the sunlight. Her legs were clad in soft, comfortable, stretchy, light brown cotton tights, and finely made dark brown, knee-high, deerskin Scythian riding boots covered her feet and calves. Hardened, boiled leather knee pads were woven into the soft deerskin boots and worked into the knee pads, and down her calves ran the intricate intertwining coils of the Aeonwyrm in teal color. Similarly, she wore forearm braces of the same hardened, boiled dark leather and teal Aeonwyrm designs that covered the loose, billowing sleeves of her shirt. A new Scythian hatchet hung on a new Scythian belt slung low over her hips. The haft of the hatchet was wrapped in teal, blue, and yellow dyed leather. Its wide, elven, green-tinged metal blade drew to a point at the top before curving gracefully down below the insertion point at the top of the haft. A Scythian recurve bow of Kiahallan wood hung on her back over a Scythian quiver of teal, blue, green, and gold, positioned laterally across the small of her back. The quiver was filled with 24 Scythian arrows, fletched by Piecora with green and red colors to represent the already mythical Saghedin Gloinigles and Fleonuis, the emerald arrow of the phoenix, as named by the late Shadia Lom Shurvanga. Her thick black hair was freshly braided and flowed around her antler headpiece of stag. On her dark auburn face, the curved designs of Silagan ink celebrated Stag and illustrated her commitment to take the remains of the tooth of Bogean Crimeran to Coast Haven, Canania, where the life and story of Serpendis could be told and commemorated. The early morning sun was rising over the rolling hills and fields in the east as large, white, voluminous clouds soared overhead like puffs of cotton lying flat on a glass table. She couldn't believe she was home again. Home being the relative term that now encapsulated all of the primal realm. Or maybe it truly felt like home to be back where she felt most comfortable, most alive, and most herself, within the ever-shifting wildlands that are unmappable because they are never the same when revisited, where the only consistent thing was her, in this ever-changing world where nothing was constant and the rules seemed arbitrary until experience taught the most basic, fundamental truths that can be implemented through every fluctuating situation in life. This was where she belonged. This was her world and her home. It was always funny to her that people would pay such a high price for these life-learned fundamental truths that she used to navigate across the wildlands. They called her the Siennian Guide in Canania. They spoke of her as if she had strange powers, and they placed their lives in her hands because they mystified her expertise into an occult-like fascination when really it all came down to awareness, observation, empathy, and adaptation. Anyone could survive in the wildlands, she secretly knew, if they could only pay attention to what's really happening around them. They need only learn what she had to learn. But this was how Piecora made her living. As long as there were ignorant rich people in the world, she could take their money by holding their hand across the chaotic wildlands between Canania and Sienna. What she really offered them and what they really paid for was peace of mind. As she looked around her, it struck her as odd that the lands were exactly the same as when she entered the cave so long ago when she followed the old fool merchant Serpendis into this very cave. But then she realized that Bogean Crimeran might have sent her back to the following morning. So how much time had actually passed here in the primal realm while they were gone? She wondered to herself. Raising her hand above her eyes to survey the fields to the south, she saw 2 horses grazing in the grass, fully loaded with Siennian gear. Next to the horses were the still smoking remains of their small campfire over which the 2 had argued that night. She smiled wide, then laughed loudly. Not even a single day had passed here in the primal world. As she moved to descend the escarpment, movement behind her caught her attention, and she instinctively reached for her new hatchet, gifted by the Cynthians. Venexi emerged from the cave, breathing hard from running. He wore a black, Cynthian long-sleeved shirt of fine linen with a neckline that opened all the way down to the middle of his pale, bare, scarred chest. Cynthian lettering in gold and teal was stitched along the seams, describing the Battle of Linhigwor Leoterician, the Pool of Many Returns. Hanging from his neck on a silver chain was the Cynthian platinum coin given to him by the Morrigan. A black leather belt with the device of the mother tree burnished in the middle, dyed in yellow, cinched the black linen shirt close around his thin waist, and a long Cynthian knife of blackened, elven metal, wrapped in teal, blue, and yellow leather, hung from the belt in a black sheath decorated with the knotwork designs of the Aeonwyrm in teal. On the other side of his waist, lashed around the belt, was the journal he wrote in from the crystal Flom submersible capsule when Shadia started teaching him how to write in the Cynthian language. Loose black cotton breeches covered his legs, and soft leather boots covered his shins and feet. a black cotton head wrap stitched with teal, blue, and yellow designs of the Aeonwyrm covered his hairline, and emerging from the head wrap were his 2 ram horns, each adorned with silver rings engraved with the names of Kiagri, Shadia, and Serpendis, the names of his fallen friends. Wrapped around his whip-like pointed tail were several cloth ribbons of teal, blue, and yellow, and when he held his tail erect, they whipped in the wind like banners. "Not so friendly, the Gwagorbanog, are they?" she said. "Just ask Serpendis. Don't worry, they shun the light and open air. They won't follow you out here." "No," said Vynexi, catching his breath. "I saw no hollow elves. I came back on my own, but only after making myself turn away. The gems, they take hold of you so quickly. And you turned away from them on your own, which is probably the hardest-fought victory we've had on this adventure," Piecora said, admiringly. "If only Serpendis were that strong. I am proud of you, Vynexi, and look at what the fates have brought us." She pointed toward the 2 horses and the camp in the fields far below. He followed her pointed arm and furrowed his brow in confusion. "Are those for us?" Piecora smiled and said, "Those are 2 fine Sienyan horses, prized all over the world, bred and trained for traversing the wildlands and loaded with gear, all bought and paid for, and they are all for us." "I don't know how to ride a horse," Vynexi said sheepishly. A devilish grin crept over Piecora's face, and she said, "Neither do Canonians. I'll teach you the proper way to ride a Sienyan horse. Maybe I'll teach you a few more things as well." She turned and looked across the landscape. "Tell me what you see," she said. "I see a far horizon, fields to the right, a winding river that fades into the distance, and hills to the left that carry a dark forest on their backs," he said. "And the sky," she said. "Clouds overhead, warmth in the sun, maybe a clear night tonight, as there is nothing on the horizon but haze, and I see Hiero, who is hunting small game." "What are the moons?" she said. "The moons, I don't know," he replied, squinting his eyes into the bright sky. "I cannot see them yet." Piecora gazed across the wildlands with Vynexi and said, "I'll teach you the ways of the wildlands, Unskavian. I've learned a valuable lesson. The more I teach you, the better it is for both of us. Hopefully, I'll sleep better at night, not having to worry about you wandering into forbidden caves." She then studied him for a few moments. Making up her mind, she said, "But first, this." She dragged her finger through some of the ink on her face, smudging and obscuring the once crisp lines and curves that were carefully applied earlier. Then she reached toward his face. He recoiled briefly, but then let her scrawl crude designs on his face, despite his rueful expression. "Oh, stop! It doesn't hurt, does it?" she laughed. She looked at her work critically, thinking of how Karui might chastise her, but the clarity of the design wasn't the point. It was the sharing of the ink that mattered, bonding him to her, like Karui did to Serpendis within her tree. Piecora didn't do this with Serpendis when the opportunity was right in front of her last night around the campfire, when she explained Banwa culture and the meaning of the Silagan ink designs to him. And now he's gone. She wouldn't make that same mistake again. "But why?" he asked, his face contorted into an exaggerated mask of pained confusion. "For luck," she said lightly, and then she placed a final splotch of Silagan ink on the tip of his nose. "And that is because it's funny." She then turned and leaped down the escarpment toward the camp that she and Serpendis shared the previous night. Thank you for listening to this chapter from the Book of Urm. If you enjoyed this reading, like and subscribe to our channel, and consider supporting us at the Book of Urm at patreon.com.